exploring survival of consciousness. Brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation on the web at www.
And I know that most of you have tuned in today, and you're expecting to hear the wonderful voice of our regular host, Angelina Diana. Angelina is taking a couple of well-deserved weeks off, and we anxiously await her return. Now, in about 10 minutes, we have a terrific guest lined up, and we welcome you to call in. I'll give him a proper introduction shortly, but his name is Dr. Charles Tart, and he's an expert in such disciplines as transpersonal psychology and hypnosis and altered states of consciousness, and that's going to be very interesting. For those that wish to call in, you can call in at 631-888-8811. We normally have a feature where you can instant message us, except that we're told that the system is down right now. So
we're going to try and get that back during the break.
Okay. Well, for now, we'll just accept phone calls at 631-888-8811. Now, I know that we usually start the show with some interesting topics, and Phran and I, it just shows you how our life has turned. Sometimes we lie awake at 2 in the morning and we start debating consciousness topics. It's kind of crazy.
More or less spirituality versus science.
Yeah. I think the other night it was about 2 in the morning, and you started. You had some idea about information with when it comes through with mediums and what it actually means. How'd that start off, Phran?
I think you're going to have to get me started on how that got started off.
I think you were talking about if we get these, how do we take the information? This information that mediums are gleaning that's set in stone. Should we take that information and use that in a warning situation? Is it something that we can change?
I think that's the ultimate question. I mean, are people going to see mediums and psychics because they're worried about the future and they think if they know they can change it? Or is it the flip side of the coin where we are not meant to change the pathways on which we were born to proceed?
Yeah, I always have that problem with pathways. Whether or not we truly have these pathways that are set in front of us. And perhaps I've heard the explanation that there are a myriad of, or let's say 4 or 5 or 6 or 7 different pathways that we can go by, and we have free will, and maybe we make a turn where we weren't going to make a turn, and we wind up on pathway number 3 instead of pathway number 4. And I still tend to think that a lot of what goes on is a result of a degree of randomness, but I know you tend to differ with me on that.
I think that there is randomness in there, and that is the free will that we have. I also think that there is something that's predetermined, and maybe that's what allows psychics to get these little glimpses into the future. But that's not to say that that's something we should depend on.
Yeah, well, what about general, that's something we can ask our guests later, but when we talk about psi phenomenon, for instance, you get a telepathic message. Is that spiritual, or is that just a normal occurrence? Are we beings that are multidimensional, and it's just we're taught, science teaches us that if we can't perceive it with our 5 senses, it really does not exist, so therefore we dismiss it. But perhaps it's not mystical, it's part of everyday existence.
Here's where I move to the other side of the fence.
Okay.
And I say this, telepathic messages and the like are normal. And it's not religion or science that has taught us that it's not normal, it's society that's taught us that it's not normal.
Well, I think the professions, if you talk to 90% of the psychologists today and psychiatrists and a large number of scientists will tell you that the brain is what produces consciousness. And therefore, if the brain is no longer with us, then consciousness is turned off. I think so. I think that we are taught that by traditional, science. How many psychiatrists actually believe in survival? Very few. They'd rather treat you, a lot of them would rather treat you with medication.
Well, here we go into the discussion on the pharmaceutical companies, but
I think that's one of the reasons that when we experience something, if we're in a room, let's say, and we see an example of remote viewing, for example, and somebody is in one place in the country and sends their thoughts out to another place and actually views what's in that other place, and we sit there and we go, wow, that's mystical, that's spiritual, but I would say that maybe it's neither. Maybe it's just
normal.
That's
what I'm telling you. Yeah. It's normal, and we have been taught to think of it as not normal.
Well, and what do you think it's going to take to change that?
Us. Us, the foundation, radio shows, newsletters, and people just standing up for what they believe in and not being afraid to speak their experiences.
Yeah. Well, if you look at a lot of people throughout history, both scientists, and you could say Einstein, you could say religious figures, you could say Jesus, I mean, it's clear that they had some sort of connection to the greater universe, or to a greater source, and we tend to look at that and, we say, well, those are, really truly unique individuals, but perhaps it's something that we all could do if we just believe we can do it.
Well, that was what I was just going to say. Did that mean that everybody else who was not these religious icons of the times, does that mean that they were not able to do that? I think that they were able to do that. They just weren't recognized as religious icons. That's all. And so we go back to my argument of it's normal.
Well, that's the key. Normal is can means a lot of different things to different people.
Even if you take Diane Archangel's book, Afterlife Encounters, I mean, she's got hundreds of stories of people having these experiences, and she worked very hard to collect them and refine them. And the reality, though, is if everybody got the message tomorrow that it's okay, that these things are normal, I think Diane's book would burst at the seams.
Right, and look at what we go through. I mean, especially you, when you had all these experiences, and I know at the beginning, especially, you would say, well, you're on this high, and then a day later you say, well, wait a second, maybe I really am crazy. Maybe it didn't really happen. Maybe I'm just reading into this.
Well, that's society closing in again.
Yeah. Well, that "am I crazy" question keeps popping up and popping up. I think that's when we'll know when we reached a good degree of education. We could stop saying "am I crazy,"
and then we'll be able to point out to the others as not being normal.
Well, we're so the question that again that I would come back to is: are we always connected, or is it something that we have to turn on? I mean, and how do we turn that on? I mean, is that do we have to shut off that brain filter and go into a meditation? But there are a lot of people that have these encounters when they're just walking down the street.
Right. So it's a wonderful question that needs exploration. But everything points to the fact that we are always in a connected state. I mean, even talk to the top mediums who say, I need to shut down just so that they can have their normal lives during the day. Mm-hmm. So we are, that certainly implies that we are connected all the time. And why wouldn't we be?
Yeah, well, I want to learn, I mean, I try all these different things, and I just, I want to learn how to get into that state, because it just doesn't seem to happen while I'm going through my everyday.
You know what it is? Because, and I think I say this every single show, that we have to stop putting it in the physical terms.
And we're going to take a short break and come back with Dr. Charles Tart.
Years, people have been reporting communication from those no longer in our physical world. Historically, science and religion have taught us to ignore such messages. Yet, there is now substantial scientific evidence to the contrary. In response to this, the Forever Family Foundation has developed a sign registry to demonstrate the existence of this other dimension. On our website, people can register signs that they, after passing, plan on communicating to a specific loved one. Upon the registrant's passing, the stored information can be verified by the recipient of these signs. Participants will be taking part not only in a grand scientific experiment, but in providing the greatest gift of all, the knowledge that we survive our physical death. For more information, contact the Forever Family Foundation at 631-425-7707, or you can find us on the web at foreverfamilyfoundation.org. Or to register a sign, go directly to thesignregistry.com.
With a nationwide insurance on-your-site experience, you'll enjoy quality insurance protection, personal service, and our signature blue ribbon claims. Guaranteed fair, guaranteed fast. If you've got a home and a car, Nationwide has great news for you. Right now, you could save hundreds of dollars every year on insurance for both. To find out if you qualify, contact your local Nationwide agent today. You deserve a faster, more convenient way to meet your insurance and financial needs. That's why we're here. Nationwide really does provide an on-your-site experience, guaranteed.
To find out how much you can save on your auto, home, or business insurance, call us at 516-766-4025. 516-766-4025.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliated companies. Life insurance issued by Nationwide Life Insurance Company, Columbus, Ohio. Nationwide is an equal housing opportunity insurer. Products and discounts subject to underwriting review and approval.
Welcome back to Signs of Life, brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation.
And welcome back. This is Signs of Life Radio, and we can be reached at 631-888-8811. And we are honored today to have as our featured guest Dr. Charles Tart. Charles Tart is internationally known for his psychological work on the nature of consciousness. He's one of the founders of the field of transpersonal psychology. He's a highly esteemed professor of transpersonal psychology at several universities. He's been involved in research in the theory of the fields of hypnosis, psychology, transpersonal psychology, parapsychology, consciousness, and mindfulness. He's been doing it since 1963. He's authored over a dozen books. He's written more than 250 articles at last count that are published in professional journals and books. He lectures regularly. And if that's not enough, he's also a black belt in Aikido, as I understand. Welcome, Dr. Tart.
It's a pleasure to be here.
It's a pleasure to have you.
Although I sound a little tired after you say all those things.
Yeah, I know. Well, you have to stop working so hard. I know that your main thrust of expertise is in the study of transpersonal psychology, and I think that's a term that many of our listeners might not be familiar with. I mean, when I think of transpersonal, I think of transcending. Can you give us some idea of what transpersonal psychology is?
You're thinking exactly along the right lines there when you think of transcending. Okay, I mean the word comes from the trans as in beyond or passing over or something like that. The personal, I mean, ordinarily we're wound up in our personal identity. I'm me, I'm in this body, I have my likes and dislikes and my roles and obligations. But transpersonal's really about the spiritual side of us that goes beyond that.
Okay.
It's a relatively new word, and it was created primarily, I think, because if you use a word like spiritual psychology, a lot of people have strong reactions for or against that in funny kind of ways. But they don't know what transpersonal means, so they have to actually listen and find out something about it first.
Right. So are we making the assumption that we are all spiritual?
I think that's the working assumption, yeah.
Okay.
That it's not just some weird idea or outmoded superstition. There may be a lot of superstition in there. I mean, we accumulate all sorts of weird beliefs, but something real is happening when people talk about their spiritual experiences.
Yeah. One of the things that we were talking about before you came on was the different type of psi phenomena that we may come in contact with, and people experience something like remote viewing or telepathy, and right away they term it as mystical, as spiritual. And what we were discussing is that perhaps that's because we're taught that if we can't perceive it with our five senses, that it doesn't really exist, so it must be mystical. So the question is: are all psi phenomena mystical, or are they scientific, or are they spiritual?
I wouldn't be happy calling them all mystical. I think that's using the word to mean everything that's weird, and I'd prefer to save mystical to talk about profound experiences have that involve more than just getting information. Like I've watched somebody like Ingo Swann do a remote viewing, and he's sitting there smoking a cigar while he's doing it.
Right.
And it doesn't look like a mystical experience. It looks like you're looking at a picture from somewhere.
Yeah.
I mean, some of the remote viewing people can get into more mystical type experiences, but, mystical is when you understand things in new ways, you feel touched by a higher spirit or something. Ordinary ESP, I think, argues for taking the mystical experience seriously, that it looks like there is a reality out there. But I think it just confuses it to call those mystical.
Mm-hmm. I'm very intrigued by your work with altered states of consciousness, and I would bet that if we took a survey and we asked somebody to define what an altered state of consciousness was, they would probably say it's somebody that took drugs. They would have altered would have a connotation of being impaired, when I suspect it's quite different. Can you tell us more about altered states?
Yeah, I've worked very hard to stop confusing value judgments and descriptions of facts, okay? So I always use altered state of consciousness simply to mean that your mind is organized in a different way. Whether that is higher or lower according to some criteria, whether it's better or worse for something, that's to be found out. And, every state of consciousness I know of that's altered, it's good for some things and lousy for others. For instance, a mystical experience is probably a good state to go to church in, but I don't know if you should drive in it. Or I don't think you should cross the street when you have this deep conviction that life is eternal and all is one. I think it's much better to be in an ordinary state where you think you're biological and you're vulnerable, and that truck whizzing around the corner toward you is very dangerous. You better get the hell out of the way.
Mm-hmm. Is hypnosis an altered state of consciousness?
Yeah. For most people, hypnosis is an altered state. The states like hypnosis, our dreaming state's an altered state for everybody. It's the mind doesn't work the same way as it does in an ordinary state. Meditation might induce an altered state, but not always. A lot of times when we try to meditate, all we get is a sore back and a lot of boredom. But it can induce an altered state. And certainly drugs can induce an altered state, too. But you can't identify them just with drugs. That's one way among many to change the functioning of the mind.
And when we're in an altered state, does that make a so-called connection to the greater universe more accessible?
Maybe and maybe not.
Yeah.
Again, it's very particular. Some people have had dreams that have turned into mystical experiences and felt connected to the cosmos, and other people have had dreams that are far more boring than ordinary life and don't feel connected at all. I think in a very general sense, knowing you're in an altered state may make you more receptive to the mystical, simply because this is not ordinary. And ordinary is where you've been taught over and over again that all that mystical stuff's a lot of crap. Okay, so the rules are different now. Your mind says obviously things are different. So it may open you up. But whether specifically anything happens, that's up to the individual and the circumstances.
Yeah.
I have a question, Dr. Tart. It's Phran.
Hi, Phran.
When you talk about altered states, a drug-induced altered state versus a hypnotic altered state versus a dreaming altered state, are they all different altered states, or is it just an altered state? Do they have different values to them?
Yeah, they're all different the way I talk about them. Okay? You can find elements of similarity, but they're all different. I mean, for instance, is a tractor the same as a sports car, the same as an airplane? I mean, they all have engines, they all move, and yet the overall way they're put together, they've got very different kind of qualities. You don't want to use a tractor when you need an airplane. Similarly, for various altered states of consciousness, they may be very useful for some things, not useful for others, but the overall feel is different.
So then people who have experienced near-death experiences while they were highly medicated, when the doctors try to rationalize that and say, well, they were on drugs, we have no way of proving one way or another that it was or wasn't the drugs that allowed them to have those experiences.
Yeah, and actually that's not science, okay? I mean, if you look at the data, actually, near-death experiences are more likely to happen in people who are not heavily sedated rather than people who are. And when some doctors or scientists try to explain them away as saying they're on drugs, they're not functioning as scientists anymore. They're functioning as people who believe that the brain is the only thing that matters, and if it's an unusual experience, it must have its chemistry altered. But they can't actually point out any drug like that. There's no evidence for any particular drug. In fact, it would be a very peculiar drug to induce near-death experiences, because it would have to be as powerful as something like a psychedelic like LSD, and yet at the same time, it would have to be something that could be turned off in the space of a few seconds. Because people say they come back from a near-death experience and, pow, just like that, they're back in their ordinary state. That's a weird drug as drugs go. And we don't know of anything like that.
Yeah, I think a lot of the research, I know with some of Bruce Grayson's work, has shown that drugs actually inhibit the near-death experience instead of enhance it.
Or they may keep people from remembering. So, for instance, in surgery, there are often drugs given that definitely mess up memory. I think of them as anti-lawsuit drugs, actually, although they probably have a more positive use than that. Yeah. So it's amazing when somebody who's had a near-death experience in surgery can actually remember it.
It's true. I remember, having a surgery and just, it's a very, very uncomfortable feeling and trying to figure out who you are and where you are, and what's happening. One thing that we've learned as a foundation is the fact that despite many attempts to make things like transpersonal psychology and especially survival science more acceptable in the scientific community, progress is very, very slow. Are scientists choosing to be skeptical, or are they, reacting emotionally on the subject?
Well, I want to be sympathetic to scientists here, even though they really piss me off sometimes, and I'm one of them.
Yeah, I was just going to say.
Scientists are people, okay? And they're people who are very knowledgeable and very highly trained in a specific field of endeavor. But when they go outside their particular field, they may be just as prejudiced and blind and opinionated as somebody with no training whatsoever. But because being a scientist is a high prestige position in our society, people pay a lot of attention to them. I have a website, for instance, in which I've gotten scientists to post their mystical experiences of one sort or another, and I only accept postings from scientists. And on one level, that's very snobbish. Okay, but on another level, I'm just making use of a social prejudice that I didn't actually create, If your plumber talks to God, well, okay, but if your physicist friends talk to God, that must be really authoritative, right? So,
right.
I'm using the social prejudice to open people more to spiritual experiences.
So as the big question is, as a pioneer in transpersonal psychology, have you reached any conclusions as to why many people, or I'd say most people, are out of touch with their spirituality?
Oh, yeah. But it's many things, It's not one simple answer. It's just the prevailing climate, for instance. Let's face it, material science has worked extraordinarily well. I sometimes like to tease people, especially my friends who are spiritual teachers, by asking them, has there been any progress in spirituality in the last few centuries? And that question really stops people. But, if I ask about chemistry or medicine or engineering or something like that, we see progress there. So we like what's successful, so clearly we get hooked on the sciences that are really successful. Now, I would say science really hasn't been applied hardly at all to questions about spiritual things. And transpersonal psychology is an attempt to do that, but it's still a very young field with hardly any resources yet. So we don't have much in the way of answers, but at least we're taking the questions seriously. And if it works out, well, someday we'll be able to say, scientifically, this kind of spiritual belief works in a different way than that one, or this one is suitable for this kind of person or not that one. But we're a long way from that yet. The best we can do so far, and this is actually what I'm going to be focusing on in my next book, is to simply say the data of parapsychology, as well as some transpersonal psychology stuff, suggests that the universe is a lot more like what we think of as a spiritual universe than just a physical one. And so you can be a scientifically inclined, a reasonable person, and still take the spiritual seriously. And I think for a lot of people that's important. I've seen so many people who deny their own spiritual experiences or something like that because they think that science has proven somehow that this is nonsense. It hasn't. Science hasn't looked at it by and large, and meanwhile it's acquired a preference for and a prejudice about material things that automatically dismisses spiritual experiences, but in a prejudiced way, not a scientific way.
Yeah. Yet when
I like to remind people that the problem actually is not science, it's scientism. That's a word sociologists came up years ago when they realized that for a lot of people, science, instead of being a way of trying to refine knowledge and to come up with ideas that are always tentative till you get more information, it's turned into a kind of dogma. And, it's human. We get attached to stuff that works, and then we don't like to think about things that don't fit. But that really hurts a lot of people by denying their spiritual experiences.
Yeah. I know in my readings these days, when I'm reading a book about physics, especially some of the modern-day physicists, and sometimes I'll sit back after reading the book and say, wait a second, that book, even though it was kind of technical, it was very spiritual. There seems to be some sort of a convergence now, especially when we talk about quantum physics and and the survival hypothesis. So it's I think that there's hope that now the spiritualists are moving, converging with the scientists and working together.
In that vein, I am intrigued by your comment, Dr. Tart, about your scientists posting mystical experiences on your website, and I think that our listeners also would like to take a great look at that posting. Can you just let us know what that website is?
Yeah. It's if you look up the Archives of Scientists' Transcendent Experience on Google or something like that, or actually just put my name into Google and that website will come up 3 or 4 items down at the listing.
And your regular website is www.paradigm, paradigm-sys.com, and there's a wealth of information on that as well.
No, that's not quite it. You then have to add /CT Tart to get my website.
Okay.
After the paradigm-sys.com.
Okay. I thought it came up with just the sys.com, or I thought it did for me, but I guess not.
A Google search is the quickest way nowadays.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. One of the main thrusts of the foundation is, of course, on survival, and one of the debates that we're always having is, what constitutes proof for somebody? Is it reading a book? Is it going to a medium? Is it some sort of a dream type visit? To some people, I know Phran and I discuss this all the time. She has this, she calls it the inner know. She just has this knowledge of the universe. And with me, I want to see empirical evidence. And it's a question. It's an interesting question. Is it only direct personal experience that would enable one to absolutely believe in an afterlife, in your opinion, or can we be taught, through readings and logic that it may exist?
Well, I think when you ask that question, which is a very important question, you use believe as if it's sort of an all or none phenomena. You either believe or don't believe. And I think it's more complicated than that. So, we can kind of intellectually believe in certain things, but if the going gets tough, our conviction about them just fades away. You could read evidence for survival and think, yeah, that's a pretty good case there. I think I'll accept that. But will that comfort you when a loved one dies? Their personal experience might mean a lot more. But it's different for different people,
Yeah.
And my own feeling as a scientist, as well as my personal feeling, is that if you look at the little scientific research we've had on this, and I call it little because even though it's gone on for more than 100 years, it's small compared to the importance of the question. If you look at that evidence, I think it makes a pretty good case that probably we survive in some form. I wouldn't say it's proven, okay? I wouldn't be functioning as a scientist if I said it's proven as if there's absolutely no questions to be raised or anything like that. But I certainly live my life on the assumption that after I die, I'm probably going to regain consciousness at some point.
Yeah.
And that's going to be interesting. Of course, I also comfort myself with the fact that if I'm wrong, I'll never be embarrassed by knowing that I'm wrong.
Yeah. Well, that we joke sometime, we work also closely with Dr. Gary Schwartz, and I always joke with Gary that the first thing that's going to happen after he passes on, is he's going to look and he's going to say, "Holy crap, I was right." It's like, but you don't know, how much. I think there's a difference if you ask what percentage are you in a belief that there's an afterlife to a scientist. They have a different. They give you a different percentage when they're speaking as a scientist as when they're speaking as a non-scientist. And I think that's wise.
And it can even vary from day to day, depending on what mood you're in and the like, what experiences have happened to you lately. A parapsychologist friend of mine, for instance, once said to me, he's so thoroughly intellectually convinced about the reality of psychic phenomena, but then his intellect starts asking questions and, well, what about? And his belief starts to fade until he sees some parapsychological event happen again, and then it reinforces it for a while. But the whole tone of our society tends to invalidate our belief in spiritual sorts of things. And that has a lot of negative consequences. I mean, not that I think everybody should just sort of naively believe. I mean, doubt has its place, especially if it can be constructive.
Right.
Because there is a lot of sorting out of the essence of spiritual truth from nonsense that masquerades as spiritual truth. But I don't think most of us are very good at being constructive in our doubt.
Yeah. We're going to take a short break. Would you please stay with us? And
sure.
We'll be right back, and we welcome you back again. Hold on.
I would like to introduce you to the Forever Family Foundation, a nonprofit organization whose mission is to provide a forum where individuals and families who have suffered the loss of a loved one can turn for support, information, and hope. We believe in the continuity of the family, even though a member has left the physical world. The Forever Family Foundation is a joint effort of scientists, research mediums, and interested people who support the premise that life does not end with physical death. We wish to prove that the bond of the family cannot be broken even by death. We invite anyone who's trying to cope with the loss of a loved one to contact the Forever Family Foundation at 631-425-7707. That's 631-425-7707. Or you can find us on the web at foreverfamilyfoundation.org.
With the nationwide insurance on your side experience, you'll enjoy quality insurance protection, personal service, and our signature blue ribbon claims. Guaranteed fair, guaranteed fast. More than just a source for quality insurance, our agents are a part of the community. After all, local service is our policy. They're trained to listen, explain, and offer individual solutions as unique as the clients they serve. Contact your local nationwide agent today. You deserve a faster, more convenient way to meet your insurance needs. That's why we're here. Nationwide really does provide an on-your-side experience, guaranteed.
To find out how much you can save on your auto, home, or business insurance, call us at 516-766-4025. 516-766-4025.
Nationwide Mutual Insurance Company and affiliated companies. Life insurance issued by Nationwide Life Insurance Company, Columbus, Ohio.
Has your marketing pitch been missing the strike zone? Maybe you need a new player to help your marketing efforts. At LNRproductions.com, you'll find a team that can give your broadcast advertising the winning edge. L&R Productions has produced award-winning jingles, radio and television commercials for many businesses just like yours. Radio and television advertising work, but you need the right game plan. Make sure you're getting the most out of your ad every time it airs. www.lnrproductions.com. We'll throw strikes for your business every time.
Welcome back to Signs of Life, brought to you by the Forever Family Foundation.
And welcome back. We're talking with Dr. Charles Tart. And if you'd like to call in and have a question for Dr. Tart, it's 631-888-8811. Welcome back, Doctor. Thanks for staying with us, Dr. Tart. I had a question regarding when we have a precognitive dream or a message. Is that our mind that's somehow transcending time? Is it tapping into some kind of a universal source or knowledge, in your opinion?
Gee, do I get a Nobel Prize if I can answer that question adequately?
You get a foundation prize.
I'll tell you, precognition, I know it happens, okay? And yet it completely boggles my mind as to how it can happen. I had an experience once where I'd done a very extensive study on trying to teach people to use telepathy, real-time telepathy, better. And in a retrospective analysis of the data, I discovered there was all sorts of precognition happening, too, in my experiment. And I was shocked, because I realized that even while intellectually I accepted the reality of precognition, it simply didn't make any sense to me, and I didn't believe in it. I mean, that's an example of what I talked about earlier of belief existing on different levels, And here it was happening in my own laboratory. I know the data shows that it happens. Sometimes we pick up what's in the future. I do not pretend to have any understanding of how in the world we do it. To me, it's a wonderful example to not close our accounts with reality. It's an interesting and complicated universe, but I don't know how it happens.
Yeah. Well, that's something that, I can't help but think that someday we're going to find this common denominator, because I suspect that the same mechanism that allows a precognitive dream or allows remote viewing or allows ESP or telepathy or communication with your consciousness in the afterlife, I think it may very well be part of the same phenomenon. And
yes, it might well be.
Maybe someday all of you scientists from these various disciplines are going to find that denominator. I could hope.
Well, I'd certainly like to find that stuff out.
Yeah. Well, how much money do you need?
I need more smarts as well as money.
Well, I think you've got the smarts, so we have to see about coming up with the money.
That's actually a very serious question, because, years ago I did a survey of parapsychologists to find out how much money was being spent. This was back in the 70s. And I found that for the entire field in the United States and Canada, it was something like a total of maybe $500,000 a year. Now, by scientific research standards, that was enough to support one scientist at an ordinary institution with an assistant. I mean, it just showed, that we're devoting practically nothing in the way of resources to dealing with these important questions.
Yeah.
So it doesn't surprise me in a sense that progress is, shall we say, pretty slow.
Mm-hmm. I know. You made me think. I remember one of your favorite sayings from reading one of your articles was that there is no God but reality. To seek him elsewhere is the action of the fall. So, when you say that, are you saying that perhaps we shouldn't be blinded about preconceived notions about a higher source, but we should learn by personal experience? Or am I?
That would certainly be one good interpretation of it.
Okay.
To me, it's something I was taught by a spiritual teacher, and it supposedly comes from some spiritual group. I don't know what the original source of it is, but to me it's a reminder that so often, even when we have the best sort of motives, we're nevertheless so attached to our prior beliefs that we can't see what's in front of us. We insist on making things fit with what we already believe, and so we pass up an opportunity to learn something new.
There's a lot of truth in that.
Whatever we're looking for in terms of the highest God, whatever you want to call it, it's got to include all of reality in there. Not just, if I only look here, I can verify my beliefs, but I'm not going to look over there. That's not going to work in the long run.
Can you explain to me why so many people, including yourself, have a background in electrical engineering? I mean, scientists and researchers that study consciousness and survival. It's uncanny how many of you started as electrical engineers. What's up with that?
That's an interesting question. I never thought about it before.
Maybe you recognize that we're all beings of energy. I don't understand, but it really is. I really have noticed a common thread with a great many of your peers with that background.
I think one aspect of it might be that if you're into engineering and radio and all that sort of stuff, you're used to the idea of communications at a distance and all that, and it opens you up. But that's a better question than I can answer.
I'll find out the answer and get back to you.
I was kind of thinking that maybe there was some subliminal energy message that gets imparted onto all of these electrical engineers that makes them want to seek something deeper.
I don't know. I certainly knew that under those respectable crew cuts at MIT back when I was a student, there were people interested in a lot of pretty wild stuff by conventional standards.
Yeah, I know that you've written that we're inherently spiritual, creatures, and on that topic, do you think, I know that I've read some people believe that we have this spirituality, or some even termed it as a God gene, something encoded in our DNA. Do you subscribe to that kind of a theory?
Well, the people generally writing that are generally going into a very different place than I go. They're generally on the explain it away trip, that there's some sort of flaw in our programming that makes us susceptible to this sort of thing. I would approach it in a different sort of way of saying, well, insofar as we are spiritual creatures, and that's what makes the best sense to me, but we're clearly very involved with the physical bodies that we're involved in. Nevertheless, there'd have to be something programmed in there to make us receptive to spiritual things. Or maybe but that's just a working hypothesis at this point. Maybe our spirituality totally transcends any genetic kind of connection. But it's sure fashionable to try to explain things in terms of genetics nowadays.
Yeah, it's a neat little package if you can explain it away as in your DNA,
Yeah, but explain it away is the tricky part. There's too much explaining away, which means you don't really deal with the subject matter. You just make it sound like you do it.
Mm-hmm. I know you've talked about the struggle that many of us have with the doubt, that science has instilled in us, and many of us have faith as the result of religious dogma. So I guess the key is balancing the two.
Yeah. I mean, we have to have a certain amount of faith in life. Like I have faith that the chair I'm sitting on right at this minute is going to continue to hold me up. I could be wrong. I suppose somehow the chair could just kind of collapse, but it's very unlikely. But at the same time, if we have to have a certain amount of faith, we also want to keep aligning that faith with what we find out about reality. Again, that's saying there's no God but reality. To seek him elsewhere is the action of the fall. The trouble is people get a faith that makes them comfortable, and then they get real rigid about it. Instead of saying, well, this is my faith that the world is like so-and-so and it's spiritual in this way, but I'm not that smart and they all advocate some humility. I better keep looking at reality and adjusting my faith and my beliefs to what I can learn from it instead of freezing it up.
That would make it a wonderful world now, wouldn't it?
I think it would sure improve things, yeah.
One thing that we've certainly have taken notice of is the effect that a belief in some sort of an afterlife, the effect that has on somebody that's in grief. It really can mean a tremendous difference. It's one of the things that, as a foundation, we run these afterlife discussion groups, and I know that people that go to some traditional forms of therapy, as soon as you start talking about survival, the group leaders would sort of, brush you aside, and we don't talk about those things. But yet, talk to somebody who's suffered a loss, and that's pretty much all they want to talk about. So, I mean, I think that researchers and psychologists, do a wonderful service when they, either present evidence of afterlife encounters or incorporate some of these things into their practices as psychologists, because it has a tremendous, it's probably the most effective form of grief therapy is a belief in the afterlife.
Yeah, but that blanket denial is not good therapy, I mean, it's one thing if you see somebody using their belief in an afterlife to not deal with the actual grief they feel and all that. You may have to tell people, forget the belief room, deal with your actual feelings. Yeah. But to simply blanket deny that there's anything there, that's lousy therapy.
Yeah, it certainly is. Would you mind taking a caller?
Not at all.
Okay. We have Juliet from Greenlawn. Juliet, you're on with Dr. Tart.
Oh, hello, Dr. Tart.
Hi, Juliet.
Hi, how are you?
I'm fine. How you doing?
Good. I tuned in late to the program, but I've been listening in the last few minutes, and I've also looked online to see your book. I'm very excited about reading that. I have a question about meditation.
Mm-hmm.
And I just need some tips, some pointers. I think I need the assistance of some tapes, or what would you recommend? Do you have any quick tips for someone who's having difficulty in concentrating?
Yeah, I think of myself as an expert on the difficulties of meditation because I've experienced them all over and over and over again. If I had to give you a real quick tip, I'd say look up Shinzen Young, Shinzen Young on Google.
Okay.
Go to his website. He is a friend of mine who's worked very hard at teaching various systems of meditation in a language that makes sense to modern Western people and that will work for various people. He got me meditating when I'd long ago decided that whatever meditation took, I didn't have the talent for it. And I think that's practically miraculous. And he's very clever that way.
Oh,
and there are a lot of good teachers out there, but, in a short time, that's the one tip I'd give you most quickly.
Mm-hmm. Oh, well, that's great. Wonderful. Thanks.
Good luck.
Thank
you very much.
Yeah, that's an interesting subject of meditation. I am not successful. I've tried several times. I've actually gone out to ITP. I know you do some teaching, and I have built a psychomantium in my house that I ripped off from Martha Hastings, and but I know it's sort of a trite term to quiet your mind, and I try all different methods, and my mind just keeps racing, and then and I try to get back to it. There has to be a better way. I don't know what I'm doing wrong. It's like I've even resorted to the fact of making believe that I've had a lobotomy so that I have no brain. That's actually worked for me once.
I'm laughing because that described the essence of my problem. I tried many different systems for years and got nowhere. And I kid myself that, that they all started first quiet your mind and then, and I never got to the and then part because my mind was so noisy. So you need some system that doesn't insist that you quiet your mind first. And so, something like Shinzen Young's techniques or Gurdjieffian mindfulness techniques, some of the things I talk about in a few of my books, they might work very well for you.
Right. Well, I'm certainly going. I wrote that down. I'm certainly going to look up, that technique. The when scientists study the brain, is it a function? Is consciousness in any way a function of the brain, or do we? Is there a mind that's separate from the brain? I know that modern science would like to tell us that your brain is what produces the consciousness.
Right. It would say consciousness equals brain, end of story. Nothing else needs to be said.
Right.
I don't agree with that.
Okay. So you believe we receive information non-locally, independent of the brain? Or is there an area in the brain that's a receptor for that?
There might be an area in the brain that's a receptor for it, but still, how does the information get there? This is where my background as a radio engineer comes in. I know about practical communications. And what it comes down to on a factual basis is the mind, the intention to pick up information or to influence things at a distance. The mind does things that you can't imagine any mechanism for a brain doing. And that's the kind of evidence that shows you that the mind is something more than the brain. Sure, the brain's important, right? It's like it was the individual personal computer issued to you at birth, and you've gotten real used to using it, and it's not so good if it breaks or something like that. But the user can potentially step back from the computer and do some other things.
Yeah. Well, the favorite example of showing how the brain might be separate from the mind is remote viewing. I mean, that you certainly transcend time and space. You're physically in another location, and your mind is traveling to somewhere else. I mean, your brain's in one spot and your mind's in another. To me, that's a pretty fair amount of proof that they're separate.
Yeah, that's a good example. And remote viewing works pretty well for an awful lot of people, too.
Yeah. You've done some research in that area, haven't you?
Yeah, I was a consultant at the original remote viewing project down at SRI back in the 70s, so I saw a lot of it in action.
Yeah.
And sometimes it worked extraordinarily well. Sometimes it didn't work at all, which was real puzzling, but when it worked, it could be very impressive.
Yeah, well, that's the problem. I mean, a lot of these results seem to be spontaneous, and when we try to replicate them in laboratories, they don't always work, And I know that's true with things like mediumship and the consciousness affecting random number generators and so forth. But nevertheless, you find some statistically significant results, which is very encouraging.
Even 50, 100 years ago when we had some of the outstanding mediums around, people who work with them would say it was so frustrating. One day, the material they'd get would be so good and so evidential, and the next day it was all nonsense. Didn't make any sense at all. And nobody could figure out why it worked real well sometimes and not others. That's one of the reasons where I hope if we did a lot of research on it instead of just a handful of people investigating it, we could learn how to make mediumship work better.
Yeah.
Right, so that brings me to the $1 million question.
Yeah.
We like to ask this question in some form. If money were no object, is there an experiment that you would want to propose that on some level could prove survival?
No. And I'll tell you the reason for that.
Okay.
I don't believe in any single experiment, no matter how well done, proving anything in an ultimate sense. I would want a long series of experiments to discover things, for instance, like what makes a good medium. If you've got a good medium, what makes them real accurate some days and not so accurate other days? What makes a good way to set up the situation for mediumship, okay? I mean, I'd want a series of things like that would ultimately lead us to having better mediums, more reliable mediums, and let the evidence slowly accumulate. Because any one experiment will never convince a lot of people. Right. You can always find some reason.
Spoken like an able
specify the color of the wallpaper that day, so who knows?
This sounds very exciting. Is there a plan of all of these experiments?
No. There's no serious plan because there's no serious money in the field, so people, don't get too far into planning stuff they think is never going to happen.
Okay, well, we're very hopeful about that serious money coming up soon.
Well, that's one of the goals of the foundation is to raise the money for research, and we believe in that. And I'm getting the signal that our time is up, and we appreciate so much you're joining us for this hour. It's been fascinating. I want to tell people again that Dr. Tart's website, www.paradigm, paradigm-sys.com/CT-Tart.
And get both T's in there or it won't work.
Okay, and you will have the opportunity to see the dozen books that he's written and to go in and purchase them. The latest book is called?
Mind Science, Meditation Training for Practical People.
Okay. Well, thanks so much, and I hope you'll join us again soon.
It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, Dr. Tart.
Okay, take care.
All right, bye-bye. Well, that was great. I mean,
that was super.
He's really so well versed in so many different things. On a little foundation business, are there any seats left for the holiday?
There are only a few seats left. So if you haven't made your reservations yet, you might want to call the office, 631-425-7707, or go online at www.foreverfamilyfoundation.org, and you can reserve your seats and pay for them right there online to see Robert E. Hansen and Dr. Lauren Thibodeau for our annual Holidays Past Spirit Communications Evening on December 16th from 7 o'clock to 10 o'clock at the Huntington Hilton in Huntington, New York. And a few days after that, we will be drawing our annual Holidays Past raffle. If you haven't purchased that, you could do that online as well, where we will be raffling off 10 medium readings. So one ticket for $5 will give you 10 chances to win. So again, that's at our website at www.foreverfamilyfoundation.org, or you can call the office for more information, 631-425-7707.
And I know it's far in advance, but put January 19th and January 20th, 2008 on your calendar. We are going to be having a wonderful seminar in San Francisco. We're going to be inviting scientists and researchers from all over the world to give a 2-day lecture and somewhat interactive, talking about survival of consciousness, talking about reincarnation, talking about near-death experiences. We're going to have mediums there. It's going to be and
we're also going to have
extravaganza.
It will be an extravaganza, and we will also have a big Saturday night function with Lloyd Auerbach. And if you haven't checked out Lloyd Auerbach yet, I think Google him, and you certainly will want to be there in San Francisco on January 19th, 2008. And that music tells us
it's time to say goodnight. We'll see you next week, and thanks for tuning in.